Assalamu alaikum and greetings everyone. Welcome to the Mullah Asghar Library and Islamic Resource Center, otherwise known as MARC, for our program, Conversations with Authors. This is the 8th in this series, 8 of 9. We have one more to go before the end of this year. So, my name is Shabir Jaffer, and I'm one of the directors here of MARC. I'll introduce today's guest momentarily, but before I do that, there are a few things I'd like to tell you about MARC. While I do that, please use the Zoom chat button to tell us who you are and where in the world you're joining us from. It's always very interesting to see, as we have subscribers from all over the world. Some of you may not know too much about MARC, so let me just give you a brief summary. The Mullah Asghar Memorial Library and Islamic Resource Center, or MARC for short, is named after the late Mullah Asghar Ali M.M. Jaffer, who was a scholar and a beacon of the Khoja Shia Ithnashri community. We have three key strands of work. First is knowledge navigation. MARC works to make Islamic knowledge accessible by maintaining an Islamic library that is available 7 days a week, having seminar space available for Islamic classes and discussion groups, hosting various children's programs, and producing exhibitions that promote Islamic learning. We also provide links to resources for further Islamic studies on our website. I'll tell you where to access that in a few minutes. The second area of work for us is heritage. MARC works to preserve and promote learning about the heritage of the Khoja Shia Ithnashri community through the collection and preservation of heritage texts, hosting a permanent wing dedicated to Khoja history, as well as short-term exhibitions highlighting aspects of Khoja heritage and the publication and production of literary and multimedia materials about Khoja history. An extensive collection of resources on Khoja history also is available. Thirdly, interfaith. We work to improve relations between people of different faiths by hosting interfaith events, opening our doors to visiting school groups and others who would like to learn more about Islam and the Shia faith. And we create exhibitions and multimedia that encourage learning about different religions and interfaith dialogue. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website at marcresource.org. That's marcresource.org. You can also sign up there to receive news of our future events and access videos of past ones, like this series of conversations with authors. I beg your pardon. The first 7 in the series are already uploaded and you can access them there if you'd like to. In a moment, I'm going to invite our author for today to join the session. I have a number of questions for him, and after that, I'll turn it over to you, our listeners, so that you can ask him questions or comment on his other work. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome the internationally acclaimed author, M.G. Vassanji. M.G. Vassanji is the author of 9 novels, 2 collections of short stories, a travel memoir about India, a memoir about East Africa, and a biography of Mordecai Richler. He is twice winner of the Giller Prize, the literary prize for the best work of fiction in Canada, the Governor General's Prize in 2009 for best work of nonfiction, the Harbourfront Festival Prize, the Commonwealth First Book Prize, and the Brasani Prize. His book, The Assassin's Song, was also shortlisted for the Giller Prize and the Governor General's Prize, the Writers' Trust Award, and India's Crossword Prize. His work has been translated into Dutch, French, German, Hindi, Italian, Japanese, Latvian, Portuguese, Spanish, Turkish, and Swahili. Mr. Vassanji has given lectures worldwide and written many essays, including introductions to the works of Robertson Davis, Anita Desai, who's actually one of my favorite writers, and Mordecai Richler, and the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. In June 2015, Mr. Vassanji was awarded the Canada Council Molson Prize for the Arts. He was born in Nairobi, Kenya, raised in Tanzania, and he received a Bachelor of Science from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, before going on to live in Canada. We're lucky to have him here. He's a member of the Order of Canada. He lives in Toronto, is married to Noor Jahan. They have 2 sons. He also visits East Africa and India often. His latest collection of short stories, entitled What We Are, comes out in the spring of 2021. Mr. Vassanji, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And welcome. How are you doing today?
Not bad.
For a cold day in December?
Yeah, I just went for a walk, so I feel warm.
Oh, good, good. All right. I'm hoping that this will be more of a conversation between us than an interview. I look forward to that. But before we start with my questions, I just have a couple of personal observations, or a personal take, if you like. I've been reading Mr. Vassanji's books for the last 25 years. My late father introduced me to his writing, and I believe it was in the mid-1990s when the Gunny Sack came out. My late mother, I remember taking her out to the shops in 2014 or thereabouts to buy his book called And Home Was Kariako, because she's from Dar es Salaam, and so obviously there was an affiliation there. What I like about his books is very simple. Not only are they full of intelligence, erudition, and insight, they're also about people like you and me. He writes extensively about East African Asians. He writes about our experience, both before colonization, during colonization, and after independence. And he has this way of writing that really helps you to smell, see, and hear the sights and sounds of East Africa, and indeed India, which was the subject of his book, A Place Within. And so I encourage everyone, if you are of East African stock like I am, or indeed if you are from any other stock, if you're curious to know more about this, then pick up one of his books, because I assure you that it will transport you back in time, not only to the time when we lived in East Africa, but also beyond that. So with that said, MG, tell us how you went from being a student of nuclear physics at MIT in the US to becoming an award-winning novelist. Can you elaborate as well on the quote next to your website photo, which says, "Writing was a compulsion"?
Well, you can do several things, especially two very different fields, the science and the arts, which that you make. That now I'll do this or now I'll do that. It just happens, and that's what happened. It just happened. I came to Toronto in 1980, and I thought I had to write. Although I did start writing in university and so on, but in 1980, I seriously thought I would write something to finish. And that's what I did. It was not like a decision like immigrating or,
Yeah.
or
So it wasn't a career
taking
choice
a job
as well.
or anything. It just happens. People have different interests. But this one then took me over.
Yeah. Right. So it wasn't a career choice per se. It was something that you kind of evolved into.
Career choice, but
Yeah.
No, it was not a career choice at all. For 9 years before my first novel came out, I was doing two things. I was doing my physics research, and at night I would do my writing.
Okay.
And it's just, as I said, it's a compulsion. It's a disease. I would not advise people to go into it.
I like that. So you've won several literary awards, many accolades for your work as a writer. Can you tell us about some of the highlights of this journey? Some of the people, some of the interesting people or remarkable people that you may have met along the way, and some of the unforgettable places that you visited, and what that's meant.
That's a lot of, that should take a whole hour.
Well, give us the highlights.
Well, one person I met, I was in Sydney, and this was for the shortlist for the Commonwealth Prize for my first novel, and Mordecai Richler was there.
Yes.
And I had to do a reading at a bookstore in Australia, and it was my first real serious reading, and I was really nervous. The acoustics in the bookstore were terrible, and I did a shambles. Then Mordecai Richler later took me aside and he said, "This is your work, you do it justice."
Yeah.
I never forgot that.
Uh-huh.
And a highlight during my travels, well, there were a couple. I'll give you two. One was when a friend of mine from Delhi, we were traveling in Gujarat, and we went to a kind of dargah, and so because I like going to places like that, graveyards and dargahs. Temples
Interesting
and
combination.
yeah. So we went there, and then there was the old guy there. He looked like nobody, and he seemed to be the caretaker. All these places are caretaker. And my friend, his name is Harish. He's one of those nosy guys. Quite shameless, but then of course that's a big help to me because it opens up conversations.
Yeah.
So we were going around, and then this guy, he asked about the peer who was there, and then I also don't quite remember, but this was in Ahmedabad. So the guy told us about the peer, and then Harish asked this guy, tell us about yourself. This guy got extremely offended. And it was just, usually in India, people love to tell you about themselves. They'll take pictures with you and you come and stand behind you and so on. But he was very offended. And then later on, when we were sitting, he came and sat down beside us. And then he told us his story. Apparently, it turned out that he could speak English fluently. He had spent 10, 15 years in England. He has been to university. He was an engineer. At some point, he had given up all that and decided to look after this dargah. So I was really bowled over. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And another experience was I was with another friend. Going to the south of Tanzania along the coast. We went to a town called Lindi, and we stayed a night there at a local hostel, guest house. And then we took a bus to go to the interior. We thought we'd go all around, the middle of Tanzania and come back to Dar es Salaam. So we went, and we heard that the roads are not good, that it's raining and so on. So we asked the conductor, this guy, assistant to the driver. We asked him, are the roads good? He said, yeah, no problem. We'll take you there. So we went there. Halfway, he said, get out.
He couldn't go on.
Bus is not going far. So we got out. And he said, if you want to go there, you have to go to the other side. Apparently, we had stopped at a lake. It was a temporary lake formed by rainwater.
Yeah.
And so we had to walk about the length of a football field. And I had not walked barefoot in water for a long time. It was really scary. And we had to cross. And then this guy said, last year there was a crocodile there. So that was another memorable kind of experience during my travels.
I know for a fact that there are people from Lindi who are listening in here today. I know some of them personally, so they'll be very entertained and amused by that story. So thank you for that. Let's turn to one of your novels, The Gunny Sack. That was your first novel. There's a character in that who is Dhanji Govindji, described as coming from India, Gujarat, and dreaming of Zanzibar as a boy. And I'm quoting here, that men who returned to Gujarat from East Africa were invariably rich. Young men were told to go to Africa, go to Jangbar to better themselves. Jangbar being the way Indians describe or call Zanzibar. So based on your findings, based on your research, based on your travels, how bad were things in Kutch and Gujarat that would motivate our forefathers to cross the Indian Ocean in search of better pastures?
First, before anything, for about 1,000 years ago, like about 900, 1000 AD or 1100 or whatever, Indians had been traveling back and forth from Gujarat to East Africa. So it, of course, not many people did it, but it was common to do it. We went to a town, I think Jamnagar, and met a Bora guy, and they were still sending dhows to East Africa. And he said, some of these kumbhars, the pot makers, they would go on a raft. The trade wind would take them all the way to East Africa, and then when the trade wind reversed, they would return. So this was a common kind of journey they made, and I think sometime in the 19th century, mid-19th century, larger numbers of Gujaratis went to East Africa, and part of the reason was because the Sultan of Oman decided to emigrate, move his capital to Zanzibar.
Mm-hmm.
His two advisors were Gujaratis, in fact from Kutch.
Yeah.
Lata Damji and Jairam Shivji, the big guys in those days. And so a lot of Indians, Kutchis especially, the earliest immigrants to East Africa were Kutchis. A lot of Kutchis started going to Zanzibar. And if you read the memoirs of Richard Burton, he will, he describes all these Kutchis that he meets. And Richard Burton was a linguist, he knew many languages. So even quotes this Kutchi speaking in Kutchi, so he writes down in his memoir, this is what they were saying. He ketlo sarwai, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the journeys were there. But I think at the end of the 19th century, if I'm right, somewhere near there was severe drought in Gujarat, in Kathiawar. That's when a lot of people were sort of compelled to go.
Right.
And even when I first went to Gujarat in, I think, the 1990s, late 1990s, and when I went to Jamnagar, I met people who had just come back from Africa and were returning. And the guy who was guiding us was telling us how, arrogant they were. They would come and buy a Maruti and show around and so on. So it's that kind of thing was still going on, except these new guys were going to Angola. Things were in short supply.
Further south, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say about the connection between the Sultan of Oman and the Indians of Gujarat. It works the other way too, in the sense that while the Sultan gave them the opportunity to come and trade and develop business and etc. from Zanzibar, it worked the other way around, because when Oman was made independent, or should I say the Sultan got independence from the British, they were left with very little. And it was Indian traders from Gujarat who opened up a landline to provide food and grain and everything else for the Omanis. And so the Omanis have always been very, very grateful to the Gujaratis of India.
These early guys, Jairam Shivji, the Sultans were always heavily in debt to them. They borrowed heavily from these Gujaratis.
Yeah. So I guess they had to be nice to them.
Yeah.
My next question is more in a light-hearted vein. In that same book, The Gunny Sack, you tell your readers about Kulsum, the mother of your lead character, Salim Juma. She comes from Mombasa as a bride to settle in Tanzania with her husband. She had an interesting theory of creation, and it goes something like this. After God created the world, he started to create mankind. He sat himself next to a red-hot oven with a plate of dough and made 3 identical dolls. He put the first one in, but took it out too early, so it was still white and undone. Thus was born the white race. He put the second doll in, but left it there too long. It came out burnt and black, and thus the black race. And finally, he put the third doll in the oven and brought it out at just the right time. It came out golden brown, the Asian, the perfect, simply perfect specimen. Now, tell me, MG, did you make up that story for the book, or is it part of common Asian folklore in East Africa?
Common Asian folklore, and maybe in other cultures too, I think.
Yeah?
I recently heard it in a movie, I don't know which one.
Yeah.
So it's common.
Yeah. So the character Kulsum got the part of being able to relate it. So talking of Kulsum, on a more serious note, how critical was the role of women in the lives of those families who set up shop in the interior of East Africa?
They were crucial. They were part of the family unit. Obviously, they looked after they cooked the food, or their servants cooked the food. In East Africa, however poor you were, you had a kind of assistant, whatever.
Right.
And so they did that, looked after the house, which was a very simple house, not a big one. And then obviously they would provide relief to their husbands in the shop. So they were, the whole thing worked as a unit. And then, of course, at some point, boys and girls, especially in some households, would also help in the shop, because the shops ran from 7 or 8 in the morning all the way 7 days a week to 6 or 7 at night. So, you needed relief.
Yeah.
And because we didn't have big living rooms or, big recreation rooms, the shop was a place where you could all sit around and order bhajiyas and samosas and so on. So of course, everyone's role was crucial, including the children's.
In the book At Home Was and Home Was Kariako, which came out in 2014, you write extensively about the experience of East African Asians running their businesses and living in places like Dar es Salaam, and indeed some of the smaller towns of Tanzania and Kenya. And one of the things you capture very, very precisely is the feeling of cooperation, I should say, or community between the various Asians, regardless of their background, regardless of their faith, regardless of their training and education. They lived together, they worked next door to each other. There was a kind of camaraderie that you seem to capture a lot in your books. That camaraderie is sadly, missing to some degree today as we've moved west and now live apart from each other. But in the book you wrote, there were moments when the thrill of travel and discovery was such that I could go from place to place and never stop. So this is a travel memoir. You're going from place to place. I am a Ugandan. I had little experience of Tanzania, so I found this fascinating. Could you have written more about your travels into the interior of Tanzania? Was there a lot more that you could have said?
Definitely. I was accompanied by a friend of mine from Nairobi who was teaching at the university. So he just took time off without permission and came with me.
Yeah.
His time was limited. So when we reached this place, we crossed the lake after Lindi. I reached a town called, I forget, Masasi.
Okay.
A big bus stop there, a junction, and then we could have gone on in a Land Rover, over, through the forest. But his time was running out, and very reluctantly, I said, okay, let's go back. So I could have gone on forever.
Yeah.
On this because my identity with the land is so strong. I don't know where it comes from. I don't think any of my siblings or even my friends have it. That it's just intense.
Right.
And
you grew up in the city, right?
Yeah. I grew up, but we did national service in the jungle and so on. I mean,
yeah, of course.
But the identity, and just to find out more and more and more. So there were places I just couldn't. When I reached Mwanza, this was another journey with the same friend, and we could have taken a ferry to Kisumu or Kampala or on Lake Victoria.
Yeah.
But this friend had to go back. So, okay, let's go back. So we would travel by bus, not by plane or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And just the journeys, traveling by land, seeing the land, for me is a very intense experience.
I wish you had gone on to Kampala because, as I said, I'm from there, and we currently lack a book from you about Kampala. So hopefully that will come one day. You later describe in the same book how our forefathers left the small towns of Gujarat, like Jamnagar and Junagadh and Porbandar, to settle on the East African coast. After getting to Dar, they constructed the old town of Dar es Salaam, which became known as Gam. And it was right next door, I guess, to Kariako. A few years ago, when you visited Jamnagar and you observed that walking along the street, and I quote, I could have sworn I was in Gam. The buildings, the shop names, my forebears had brought Gujarat with them to Tanzania. And actually, you then went on to describe the same feeling in A Place Within, your book about India. Can you elaborate a bit on this, perhaps? That feeling?
The buildings in Gam, initially, the buildings that were constructed in the 1930s, late 20s, up to about 1950s.
Yeah.
They were all based on Gujarati, I can't say Indian because I'm not an expert, but kind of Gujarati type of architecture.
Yeah.
So we went to Jamnagar, we were sitting around it, kind of a joke, looking, and you see these shops, not to boot house, something explore. And, 2-story building, yellow, paint, and one after another. This could be anywhere in Gam. It was just reconstructed.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Also in Kariako, you talk about the time that you read to an audience at Nairobi's museum during the opening of an Asian heritage exhibit. At that point, a man comes to you in tears and he says, "Who tells our stories? Who tells about what we have been through?" And then you go on to point out the irony in the fact that many Asians have already left and they've taken their stories with them. MG, how great is this loss, do you think? Is our own negligence to blame for this dearth of our own stories?
It's hard to blame. I think we were obviously negligent, but we were as negligent as anybody else who thought the world would go on forever.
Yeah.
So when we were young, we knew Nani Ma came from Jamnagar, and someone else from Junagadh, and there were the Kachis and Kachawaris, and but we didn't really pay much attention. And those of us who were serious thought, when it was time, we would find out. We would go and bug them and ask them. But of course, a lot of people left, and then these people died, and then you realize that all these stories about India, about East Africa, about the history of East Africa and how we fitted in, all that was just going, which I think was a big compulsion for me to write my first novel.
Right.
Because I just wanted to gather every memory I could and put it in a sack and connect them and to create a life.
Right.
But that loss, I think, although what's happened now, interestingly, is that people grow older. Initially, when they came to Toronto, they said, "I'm Canadian, forget East Africa. Look at the roads in Dar es Salaam. They're so bad."
Yeah.
So, they thought they were Canadians. Of course, they were fooling themselves, but, I think most immigrants do.
Yeah.
And then when they reach their 50s, 60s, they say, "I want to write my memoir. I want to leave something for my children." So you find now, somehow, to some extent, there is this need to remember and write down. So when I, at the Aga Khan Center, I spoke about this book, Home Was Kariako, and
yeah.
And then there was a question time, and then this guy gets up. He goes, "I'm also from Kariako." If you had asked him 10 years ago, he would say, "Oh, what do you mean? I'm from Toronto." So things change, So, but when we were young, we, like all young people, we looked to the future, and especially in a colony.
Yeah.
We didn't even look to India. We all thought of London. We wanted to go to London.
Right.
And then Canada opened up. Everyone wanted to go to Don Mills.
Yes. Yeah. The center. You're definitely one of the few writers of East African Asian heritage who is writing and telling people about our story. And we do a bit of that in Mark too, as you know. And I think it's doubly important that we ensure, for the sake of our future and for the sake of our future generations, that they know who we are and where we came from. Turning to a different question, also staying with the book And Home Was Kariako. Those of us who went to school in East Africa, like yourself, myself, and many of the people listening in on this call, we all learnt in our history class the story of Burton and Speke, the two British explorers, who supposedly discovered the interior of East Africa. At least that's what it says in those history books. Forgetting, of course, that there were people living in the interior for many years before that. But in your book, you introduce us to that enigmatic character called Lada Damji, an Indian of the Bhatia caste of Kutch. Without his assistance in providing supplies to the two explorers, you question how successful their expedition would actually have been. You point out that we've been told so much about the European explorers. We know little about the Asians and Africans who made their journeys possible. And clearly there were plenty of Asians and Africans who made those journeys possible. Why is it important to tell their stories?
I think we have to somehow fit into the history and consciousness of the world. Yeah. You can't just be reading about other people. And then other people, tell stories about themselves. Look at the stories of the First World War. Every year, half a dozen novels come out about the First World War in Britain. Look at the history of biography of Nyerere. You have one. I think recently one has come out, I think a few months ago. But you see, we don't tell our stories. How many stories, how many biographies of Lincoln there are, Kennedy and so on. We have had great people in our culture, but we don't tell our stories.
No, we don't.
So we have to somehow stand up and say, I'm here too.
Yeah.
And those of us from East Africa, we have people who, and there are about at least 6 books on Burton and Speke. They're the famous quarrel about whether Speke really discovered the source of the Nile or not. And, then they had a competition or debate in somewhere in Bath in England. And then Speke accidentally, shot his rifle and killed himself. So it's a famous story. And they keep writing about it. They say, but there was Leda Damji, there was Jairam Shivji, there was Tanya Topan. All these guys were outfitting the explorers. Plus, the explorers, of course, don't tell us about their personal lives. You read in detail, and you find some of them were drunkards.
Yeah.
That doesn't make them bad explorers, but those personal stories, because they write their versions.
Mm-hmm.
We know nothing about Leda Damji. Was he short, tall, thin, fat? But Burton at least gives him some credit. He does say that this guy was vital, and saved him. In fact, saved one of the expeditions from total disaster when all the porters disappeared. And then Leda Damji went and got more porters, and and so on. So I ask myself when I read this thing, where am I in this? And it's the same question when we were kids. We all read about wonderful books about Charles Dickens and Enid Blyton and this and that. And I said, where is Uhuru Street? It's not there.
Yeah, indeed.
So we have to, I think, to be complete, we have to be part of global consciousness of world history. Otherwise, you're reading other cultures.
Yeah.
And I personally believe it makes us weaker as human beings.
Right. In a related manner, I'm struck by the story of David Livingston, the other explorer, the other great explorer, who died of malaria near Ujiji, I believe, and his body was transported by his African bearers all the way to the coast.
And Chuma.
Right? Yeah. Well, what else do we know about them? And why aren't they lauded as heroes by the people who wrote the history of Livingston? I don't know that they are, but
they're heroes, but we know not much about them. But I think recently something did come out. But you're right. Yeah. We heard about Susi and Chuma as only people who took the body of Livingston and now lies in Westminster Abbey and so on. But we were totally brainwashed. When I first went to London, the first place I wanted to go and see was David Livingstone's grave.
Right.
That much, So that's.
I guess we learned history from a one-sided perspective. To just describe it that way, there's probably a better way to describe it. But it now takes us. It now requires us to open up and see it from other perspectives. Anyway, in A Place Within, your travel memoir of India, you ask why we haven't kept better records of our ancestry. And you ask that question again when you visit your grandfather's village in Gujarat. This is a common feeling. And again, we're all perhaps affected by this. I remember being asked a couple of days ago by a cousin who wanted to know how we were related to somebody or somewhere else. And I had no clue. I could not place it. But the fact of the matter is, given we don't have ancestry.com or anything else, we have people, amateurs who are dedicated to doing this and capturing ancestry. How poignantly did you feel the lack of connection with your grandfather in this?
But I felt this for much before then.
Yeah.
Because we're very conscious. We are colonized in several ways: British, and then of course Arab.
Yeah.
Somehow we think our histories, our roots are in India. But somehow we think they are not important. I don't see why. Every Indian part of Indian history is my history. I really believe. And no one can deny that, neither Hindu nor Muslim. But when I went to this village, Junagadh, it's outside Junagadh, outside a place called Una. It's called Gir Gadara. And when I went there, So, it was the only place near Junagadh that you find actually names like Vassanji and Nanji and so on. And if you go to Surat or Ahmedabad, it's a rare name. In that part of the world, you see many Vassanjis and Nanjis and Laljis. So,
in Laljis, yes.
yeah. So I asked around, about Nanji because my great grandfather Nanji came from here.
Yeah.
They say, oh, Nanji Baba, but I don't know if it was the same Nanji. But anyway, they took me to an old guy's house. He was sitting there on, this julo, the swing.
Yeah.
They said, ask him. So this guy came and said, sit beside. So I sat beside him. So he gave 10 names of 10 of his ancestors.
Uh-huh.
I said, we don't even know our clan name. All people from Kathiawar, especially the Khojas,
right,
have a clan name which ends with Ani. Lalani, Bhimani, Kanani. These are clan names. The old people, old Khojas knew it.
Yeah.
Whereas what we did was get rid of them and say, oh, my clan name, Assam. And then it's an Arab tribal name. What is a clan? That may offend people, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And
so
if you don't, we completely cut off our links and then are totally adrift. And maybe North America is the best place to be, rootless.
Yes.
And invent new histories because, when you don't have history, you can invent it.
Yeah.
Some invention, of course, is also going on. And, that's life.
Yeah. Very true. You make some excellent points. I had a couple of more questions, but in the interest of letting our audience come in at this point, I'm going to turn it over to them. Let's see what they have. I've seen a lot of questions pouring in, so let me just pull the first one up. Lots of people from all over the world tuning in for today, from India, from Africa. I'm just noticing some of the names from New York and England. Seeing the next question. What was so unique about Kariako that made you specifically dedicate a whole book to it?
Well, the title of the book says it, that was home. And home is just the streets, the language, the songs on the radio, as you walk to school. Many times you sort of had to wade through water to get to school, or to got your foot into a pile of mud on the way, or playing on the sand, or playing cricket on the outside your shop.
Yeah,
eating bhajiyas, and it's everything that is life.
Yeah,
and that's what it is.
Right. You just felt totally comfortable and at ease there. In your book, The In-Between World of Vikram Lal, which, if I recall, was an award-winning book, your second Giller Prize, please talk about the tension of love and relationships between Indians and Africans. Now, I don't know what please talk about necessarily goes to. I mean, you probably could talk about that for a long time, but give us some thoughts on that. And this question is coming from Razabai Hirji.
Well, we came from small communities. So we had, although the relationships between communities were not as violent or as hateful as they are in India now.
Yeah.
There was a local minor competition, cricket matches and so on. Marriage was forbidden because I think, this is my thing, it was less racial than religious.
Yeah.
So for a Khoja Ismaili to marry an Isnashiri was the worst thing. Next worst to marrying a Sikh. You see? Right. So there were these
degrees.
Degrees. And in fact, I had a cousin who I think fell in love with a Hindu, and they had to run away to London. And I have a friend who unfortunately died in Philadelphia. Same thing happened to her sister. So, it was the faith thing that was paramount.
Yeah.
And whenever we mentioned another community, it always meant the faith. Because we somehow thought we were on the golden path, straight to heaven, and everyone else would follow later.
Yeah,
And,
I've heard that expressed before.
yeah, and it's obviously coming out into the world taught us that lesson that everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
Find a new story.
Yeah. We're
So
not alone in that.
Africans, of course, it was all the same thing. Or maybe it was worse. Made an African, but it happened in Zanzibar, for example.
Mm.
Marriages with Africans, and of course, before the Asians came in larger numbers, the men came, and the men, of course, had mistresses or concubines or whatever you call them.
Yeah.
And their progeny is still around. As soon as they adopted the faith, there would be a minor teasing. Obviously, we knew these guys and so on, but they were part of the community.
Right.
They were not denied any rights or anything. And now, if you go to, I've written in my book, Almost Karako, I think, the last page where I went to a function with all these different blacks and whites and browns and they were part of the Ismaili community, the young kids, and it was a really moving experience. It was not. I don't believe it was as deep as it is in other places.
Yes. There are a couple of other questions that came in by text. There are also a few people holding up their hand, and I just want to assure those people that I will get to you. I just need to deal with two more questions that came in by text early. It is regarding your upcoming book of short stories, What We Are. Can we expect to see some familiar themes of your past work, like a colonialist or post-colonialist setting? Somebody returning to East Africa in search of someone or something, or do you want to keep that a surprise for us?
Well, it's about people who've grown up, who came here and are older. So some are the same and some are not the same, but the issues are different. The world even when they return to East Africa in one story, is different and for a different reason.
Right.
It's more a kind of how do we grow up? How do we grow older?
Right.
What have we become? That's what it is. What we are is what have we become.
Yeah. That question came from Alia in New York. Another question now from Fatima in London. Who inspires you to write now? And what are you reading yourself? What are you reading now?
Nobody inspires me except myself and my kind of age and despair and depression. You have to keep writing like breathing.
Yeah.
But I can't stop.
Okay.
That's how it is. What I'm reading several things. And I think I'm reading a 10-volume, edition of the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm.
I read 1.5 volumes every year, so I'm in volume 8.
That must be heavy going.
It's heavy, but it's very, very interesting. It's not the usual story they give you, about the war between two, cousins and so on. It makes you think. It's a very violent book.
Yeah.
Once upon a time in America or something like that. And I'm also reading several histories about the Mongols. That period fascinates me. There are some monks who went to that part of the world, and there are local historians who wrote about that, and in their relationship to the Sultanate in Delhi.
Right.
Has been kind of fascinated me since my first trip to India. I'm working with that.
Is that the era of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan? MG, in terms of the Mongols, are you talking about the era of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan? That era?
Genghis Khan and his descendants, Kublai Khan, Hulagu Khan, and other Ghazan Khan. It was big, and they broke up into 4 kind of regimes, sultanates. Kublai Khan was in China, Hulagu Khan was in Persia, and there was people in Russia and so on.
Yes. Okay. Yusuf Bhai Sivji has his hand up. Zara, could you please unmute Yusuf Bhai so that he can ask MG his question? And Assalamu alaikum, Yusuf Bhai, welcome. We can't hear you yet.
How about now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jafar. Shabir. My question is a very long one, so unfortunately I'll have to cut it short because I don't want to waste everybody's time here.
Yeah, we do have a lot of other questions, so but go ahead. Go ahead.
Now, I'm from Zanzibar originally. I was born in Zanzibar and left there after reaching the age of 18 or 19. In 1962, I came I migrated to the United States. But my point is this, and that is the Africans have to take a lot of blame for what happened to us. And not the obvious way. This is in a way that I said I was treated very badly by the Africans. I was not a rich person. I was a very poor person from a very poor family. And still I was treated as if I was the rich one. I was the one from the family of exploiters. But that is understandable, So my question is this. Oh, by the way, I was teaching at an American university, a college called the Mbweni Technical College. And I had experience with two of Karume's sons. His son called Ali, and the older one, I don't remember his name now. And I had some incidents with them too. Now, my question is this now, coming to the question. And that is, I take my son and my daughter right now. I take my son and my daughter to see my old house in Dover, Connecticut when I first came here. And they are very, very, very impressed by it. They go and see their high school, elementary school kids, teachers. And they enjoy it to see their way where they were born, what happened to them when they were young.
Okay, I think I get a sense.
They enjoy it very much. Now, I would have liked to do the same thing for myself. I would have liked to walk down Marindi Street in Zanzibar and show the 6, 7 houses that I moved into when I was young. I don't understand what right do the Africans have, especially people like Karume, who himself was not of Zanzibar origin. I understand that he came from Malawi. And
I understand what you're getting at, and I'll let MG answer that briefly. But thank you for your question. Thank you for your question, Yusuf Bhai. MG, would you like to just quickly address that?
Well, it was a revolution, and revolution is full of unfair practices, violence. We have to remember that Zanzibar society was based on slavery.
Yeah.
A lot of these people had slave roots. Even when I was a kid, there's some people would call in Africa, "Wem Tumwa, you slave." So, that history cannot be forgotten. It does not mean there was, during a revolution, there could not be unfair practices, but they're not going to distinguish between a good Asian and a good African. But from what I have read, it's the Arabs who suffered the most.
Right.
And they, of course, were the biggest slaveholders. Yeah. So it just happened, and people who suffered were unlucky.
Right.
Those of us who left East Africa, we also felt unlucky because times changed in a very unfair manner. But that you have to accept it. What can you do?
Yeah.
But
Zara, can I ask you to just mute everyone else on the call? I think I'm hearing some background noise. Thank you for answering that question, MG. Let's just turn to the next one that I have on the screen. Could you please describe your writing process? This is from Bilal Manji in New York. Could you please describe your writing process? What advice would you give to aspiring novelists, particularly those interested in writing historical fiction?
The only advice I can give is just to keep writing and to write to finish. Not a lot of people say I'm writing. I have a good memory. I can write, but I will finish. The thing is to write to finish, and and you have to remember that you'll have to maybe rewrite 5, 6, 10 times, before you are satisfied. And at the end of it all, you'll have to find a way to publish it. It's easier now because there are ways in which you can self-publish respectably.
Yes.
Whereas in the past, to self-publish, was sort of looked down upon.
Right.
So there are ways, and people have done it, but of course one has to be careful. But the main thing is just to keep writing. If you have a story to tell, you should tell it.
Yeah.
And also read a lot, at least initially. Sometimes if you read too much, you get depressed or influenced.
Yeah.
But that's all I can say.
The point about self-publishing is very well taken. I have a very good friend of mine who's actually on listening to us today, who did that very thing. And Bilal, if you ever want to be connected to him to understand the process, I'd be happy to connect you to them. A question from Hasni. Sir, what you wrote in your book about German rule in Tanganyika, were they so ruthless?
Well, this was by reputation. I met one eyewitness. She was a kind of person of the older generation, and she would say the German, was very fair but ruthless. So they had a reputation. But they also developed. There were many people who were faithful to them. There were people when I was growing up who had known the Germans, and when the Germans at some point decided to give pensions to all those soldiers who had fought for them against the British, a lot of the soldiers came, and they greeted this one Ledo, the army guy who had led them.
Yeah.
The fight during the First World War. So they developed loyalty, but they had a reputation for cruelty.
Okay.
This is what we heard. Could be partly British propaganda, but I think partly true.
Yeah. Okay. Question from Risha Dawar. Sir, what ideas or factors inspire and influence you to rewrite histories where histories are missing?
So it's not, to invent, maybe, I don't know. Because I'm not sure about the question, but as I said, we feel a great deal of loss about who we are, even what our names are. So you go by, what I've gone by, bits and pieces, like in the Gunny Sack, bits and pieces of memories, mementos, stories overheard from your parents, from your grandparents, and then do a lot of research, because there is research. They're not going to give you details about, how these people thought or lived, but that you can provide instinctually and hope for the best. So that I have done, and there are some nuggets you find. There's one guy who was sent from Zanzibar to east coast of Africa, Tanzania, to basically to free all the slaves owned by the Indians. Many of the slaves were concubines. But he would go there, and then he went to all these shops, tiny little villages along the coast, and then he described some of these shops. I said, "This is wonderful, Nobody else has written about this. He actually describes a shop and given the name. One guy's name was Vassanji Bimji. I know that. Things like that, So you come across. And because our history is so lacking, I'll give you an example. If you read Hilary Mantel's book on Henry VIII, three novels, and the details that she supplies about that period, 3 big fat novels. 2 of them have won the Booker Prize.
Yes.
And it makes me jealous. I say, we know nothing. These guys can go into tiny detail. We don't even know what clothes they wore. I had to ask this old lady, and we lived in Markham. I said, how did they come from the ship to the boat, to the shore? And, whether they came by boat or what they carried or what did you wear? And whereas all this has been recorded by other cultures, especially by the British. And I'm very envious, but there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
They have it, we don't have it.
You're spot on. The Wolf trilogy has in tremendous detail in it that we could never aspire to get. Okay, moving on. This is more of a comment of appreciation, so not necessarily an answer needed here, but from Elizabeth Va. Nostalgia is at the heart of most of our writings. Thank you for writing and for helping us to write too. Thank you, Mr. Vassanji. And it's interesting because she uses the word nostalgia in the form of the noun or the description, but there's also your book, Nostalgia, which you wrote, which was a bit of a departure from your normal self or writing. And I think there's a question about that later. But anyway, that's a comment of appreciation from Elizabeth Va. From Kurban Manji, my last name is Manji. That was my grandfather, but I have been told that my family's ancestor was a Damji in the 1780s, and that makes our Antakya Damani, descendant of Damji. How far is that true, that Damji's descendants are Damanis?
I would say Damani's descendants are Damji.
Okay.
Or at least all the Damjis would be from a Damani clan.
Right.
Atak. If you go to Rajkot or somewhere and you say, my mother's maiden name is Jiwani, and she says, yeah, there's a Jiwani there. Because that is a Atak, and they put you in a clan.
Yeah.
But many of us, unfortunately, have sort of forgotten them.
Yeah. Thanks, Kurban, for that message, and also thanks for the chutzpah. I believe that's the way it's pronounced. For giving me that chutzpah to invite MG onto this program. Yeah, and he then goes on to correct himself. Our Atak, not Antakya. Great chat. Thanks for sharing your stories. This is from Pankaj Mehra. What prompted you to move to nostalgia and write a futuristic book when your works generally deal with nostalgia of our historical past?
Well, I would say first, my works are not nostalgic. They're just because I don't want to go back to the little shop that we lived in or over. I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah,
I remember it fondly. I don't know if that's nostalgia, but for me, nostalgia means I want to go back to there. I don't. But the book Nostalgia, perhaps the title was unfortunate. What I had in mind, because in the 90s especially, we used to be told about integrate, assimilate. And how do you assimilate? Change your skin color? What do you do? Change your memories? Then the idea occurred to me, maybe suppose it was possible for us to erase our memories. Then of course, completely assimilate. So you erase your memories, but you have to replace them with something because we all need a root. So then the novel grew into that, where people are able to erase their past. So if you were sort of born in some place called Tukuyu, you can say, oh, yeah, you erase that. Now you are born in Sussex, for example. So you can make up a completely new history, and everyone has his own history. And this is not far-fetched. You can even change your features, as people now do.
Yeah.
Then the past no longer matters. It's only the present and the future matters. But then, because being what I am, and the reason why I write what I do, I thought, suppose you suppress your memory, but something sneaks out from the back, that you couldn't suppress, like a worm, and starts to grow and creates a cataclysm in your brain. That, for me, was the phenomenon of nostalgia. There's something you suppressed, you thought you had suppressed, it comes out.
Right.
The novel is about that. So it's futuristic in that, definitely, yes. But it seems more and more not so futuristic.
Right. And Pankaj Bhai has just thanked us for that response. Thank you for that response. I'll turn to one of the questions that I left out. Oh, by the way, we're just past 2:00. Are you okay to continue for a few more minutes, MG?
I'm fine.
Yeah? Okay. So we'll continue as long as the Zoom call will allow us for a few more minutes. And this question is about how, firstly, as Lohanas, we Khojas, Ismailis, Isnashis, whatever you want to say, migrated from Afghanistan to India. And then after becoming Khoja Muslims, whether Ismaili or Isnashi, we migrated from India to East Africa. And then in the 20th century, we migrated again to the West. You think we are sufficiently woven into the fabric of Western society now to the extent that another migration is unlikely down the road? Or are we as a people, do we have a character that if circumstances dictate, we will move to any corner of the world to set up and do business?
I think we are set up to move, but of course we live in a very comfortable, even spoiled society. So we move as it, in the sense that go for a job or send your kids to.
Sorry. Could we please mute your phone? Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
But I was being invited to dinner. Sorry.
Me too. Yeah.
No, because a lot of people now, they send their kids abroad.
Yes.
That's part of the same phenomenon. It is nothing for us if your kid goes to New York to university, or goes to, England or to France or whatever. So we have that itch. And I think perhaps all Indians have it, because if you go to India, half of northern India, their kids are outside.
Yeah.
It is true. But I think Gujaratis, as I said, started leaving in the 10th, 12th centuries. And when the Portuguese went to India, on the way,
right,
they took two guides, who were Gujaratis, Indians at least. In Malindi, they picked up two guys and they took them to Calicut.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've been there. I think it's in our blood, and even the fact that we were Lohanas and then became Khojas, that's our first migration in a sense.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Are you planning to write another book about East Africa? And if so, what would it be on?
I think I'm too. You have to be immersed in it, and it would be hypocritical to do that. I think now, in the state of my life, I'm looking at other things. More general things.
Okay.
The short stories I wrote and the novel I wrote, written, and so on.
Yeah. Next question from Salim Ladak. Are you familiar with Cynthia Salvadori's works? Have they proved helpful in your work?
I know about it. They came in Taos or something like that. No, I don't know. I know about that, but I found out about it after I had written the Gunny Sack.
Okay.
But
from which?
Some of these oral stories you have to also be very careful about.
Yeah.
Because some foreigner comes and asks you questions, and sort of embroider a bit.
Yes, indeed. I don't see any more stories on the chat. I don't see anybody's hand up. I'll give them a half a minute if they want to ask anything, to put their hand up or write something in the chat. But otherwise, we'll move to close. So let's give themselves half a minute. There's a couple of comments though from Mujtaba Datu. Great discussion, exquisite writing by Mr. Vassanji. Thanks for sharing your insights. We enjoy your book. This is from Raza Hirji. We enjoy your books and thanks for writing. And I think that's it for the time being. So, thank you, for joining us. It was tremendous, and I believe your family was on the call too. So hopefully they enjoyed listening in. And any parting words? Any message you want to leave us?
No, it was nice to make a connection. It was great to talk to you.
Right. Thank you. And thanks for agreeing to spend time with us. We look forward to your next book in the spring. And in the meantime, we wish you and your family well. Stay safe. And I'll just preview our next session for the benefit of our listeners today. Our next session and the last in the current series will be held on Saturday, December the 19th. Our guest on that day will be Dr. Bashir Ahmed Datu, an academic and a writer who also hails from Zanzibar, and he has had an extensive experience as a scholar and academic both in East Africa and in the US, where he is currently resident in Orlando, Florida. And we'll be discussing his book, Islam, Misconceptions and Challenges, which deals with a number of very interesting issues that affect Islam today and the practice of Islam and Muslims as well. So I look forward to talking to him, and I hope you'll all be able to join us December 19th, Saturday, December 19th at 1 p.m. with Dr. Bashir Ahmed Datu. And so for now, I just want to say thanks to the Mark team for helping me put this on. And thanks again to M.G. Vassanji for spending time with us. Everyone, have a great weekend. Stay safe and Khuda Hafiz.